I never thought I would hear my own son talk about me like I wasn't even there. The room at the nursing home smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. I was sitting in the wheelchair near the window when the nurse stepped out to take a call. My son Daniel thought I was asleep. He leaned toward the nurse's desk and spoke in a low voice. "I'm not coming back for him," he said. "Just keep him here." The nurse hesitated. "Sir, your father might want to." "He won't." Daniel cut her off. "Trust me, he's better off here." Better off. I kept my eyes closed, my hands resting quietly on the blanket. My heart felt heavier than it had in years. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike, running behind him on the sidewalk while he wobbled and laughed. "Don't let go, Dad," he shouted. I never did. Until that moment. Daniel came over a few minutes later and gently touched my shoulder. "Dad," he said softly, pretending kindness. "I'll visit soon, okay?" I nodded slowly, as if I believed him. But that night, after he left, I made a phone call. "Hello, Mr. Carter," the lawyer answered. "I need to change my documents," I told him. "All of them." 2 days later, he arrived at the nursing home with a briefcase and a stack of papers. We sat in the small visitor room while the afternoon sun filtered through the blinds. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. I nodded. My son had always believed he would inherit everything: the house, the land, the savings his mother and I built over 40 years. But things change when people show you who they really are. So I signed new papers. Every page, every clause, before anyone noticed. When Daniel finally came back 3 weeks later, he walked in with the same confident smile he always wore. "How's my old man doing?" he asked the nurse. The nurse looked at him strangely. Then she said something that wiped the smile off his face. "You should talk to the lawyer," she said. "The one who came last week." Daniel turned pale. And for the first time in my life, I watched my son realize something important. Just because someone grows old doesn't mean they stop seeing the truth. Daniel turned pale. "The one who came last week," the nurse repeated calmly. For a moment, my son just stood there, staring at her as if he hadn't heard correctly. "A lawyer?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. Your father had some documents to sign." Daniel's eyes slowly drifted toward my room. When he walked in, I was sitting by the window again, the same place where I had been the day he left me there. But this time, I wasn't pretending to sleep. "Dad, what lawyer?" he asked, forcing a nervous laugh. I looked at him quietly for a few seconds. "You said I wouldn't notice things anymore," I replied. His smile faded. "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "I was just trying to help you." "Help me?" The word hung in the air like a bad smell. "By leaving me here?" I asked. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly uncomfortable. "Well, the house is too big for you now," he said. "And I have my own family, Dad. You know how expensive things are." I nodded slowly. "I do." There was a long silence between us. Then Daniel said the thing that confirmed everything. "You still have the house though, right? Not how are you feeling? Not do you need anything? Just the house." For 40 years, that house had been my pride. Your mother and I bought it when we had almost nothing. We fixed every wall, planted every tree in the yard with our own hands. Daniel learned to walk in that living room. Now he was calculating its value. I folded my hands on my lap. "No," I said calmly. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean no?" "The house isn't yours anymore." His face went blank. "What?" "I signed new papers," I told him. "Last week." The room felt very quiet. "What papers?" he asked slowly. I looked him straight in the eye. "I donated the house and most of my savings." Daniel's voice rose immediately. "Donated? To who?" "To the Nursing Home Foundation," I said. "They're building a new wing for people who were abandoned by their families." For a moment, he couldn't even speak. "You gave them the house?" he whispered. "Not just the house," I replied. His face turned red. "That was my inheritance," he snapped. I tilted my head slightly. "Was it?" He stared at me, breathing heavily. "You can't do that," he said. But the truth was, I already had. Finally, I leaned back in my chair and said the one thing he never expected to hear from me. "You told the nurse I wasn't coming home." I paused. So, I made sure the house wouldn't either. Daniel stood there in silence, realizing there was nothing left to argue about. And for the first time since he was a child, my son had nothing to take from me anymore. Only one thing remained: the consequences of what he had done. Daniel stood there, stunned. For a moment, I thought he might yell again. That had always been his way, when things didn't go the way he expected. But this time, the anger seemed stuck somewhere in his throat. "You're serious," he finally said. I nodded. "The papers are already filed." He began pacing the small room, running his hands through his hair. "You can't just give everything away like that," he muttered. "That house was supposed to stay in the family." I looked out the window at the quiet garden behind the nursing home. "Family," I repeated softly. The word felt strange now. "Do you remember the last Christmas your mother was alive?" I asked. Daniel stopped pacing. "What does that have to do with anything?" "You promised her something that night." He frowned, clearly trying to remember. "You told her you'd always take care of me when she was gone." For the first time since he walked in, Daniel looked away. "That was different," he said quietly. "Things change." "Yes," I replied. "They do." Another long silence filled the room. Then he tried a different tone, softer, almost desperate. "Dad, we can fix this," he said. "You can call the lawyer and undo it." I shook my head. "It doesn't work that way." "But I'm your son." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. And for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the kid who ran through the yard with scraped knees and grass stains. But that boy had grown into a man who left his father behind. "You're right," I said calmly. "I am your father." Daniel stepped closer to me. "Then why would you do this to me?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Because you already did it to me first." The words seemed to hit him harder than anything else I had said. Just then, there was a knock on the door. The nurse stepped in. "Mr. Thompson," she said gently, "your grandson is here to see you." Daniel looked confused. "My son?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Yes." A few seconds later, the door opened again, and there stood Ethan. My grandson walked straight toward me and gave me a careful hug. "Hi, Grandpa," he said. Daniel looked between us, surprised. "When did you start visiting him?" he asked Ethan. Ethan didn't even look at his father when he answered. "I've been coming for weeks." Daniel blinked. "Weeks?" Ethan finally turned toward him. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Since the day you left him here." The room went silent again. And in that moment, Daniel realized something he probably never expected. He hadn't just lost an inheritance. He had lost something much bigger: the respect of his own son. Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Ethan stood beside my chair, one hand resting gently on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more to me than anything Daniel had said that day. "You've been coming here without telling me?" Daniel asked his son. Ethan crossed his arms. "You didn't ask." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "I'm your father." "And he's your father too," Ethan replied calmly. That sentence landed in the room like a stone dropping into still water. Daniel looked at me again, but this time there was something different in his eyes. Not anger, not calculation. Something closer to shame. "I didn't think it was that bad," he muttered. I studied his face for a moment. "You told the nurse I wasn't coming back home," I reminded him quietly. Daniel's shoulders sank slightly. "I was overwhelmed," he said. "Work, bills, the kids, everything." Ethan let out a quiet breath. "Grandpa never complained," he said. Daniel looked at him. "He didn't want to be a burden," Ethan continued. I smiled faintly at that word. Burden. It seemed to follow older people around like a shadow. Daniel slowly sat down in the chair across from me. For the first time since he walked in, he didn't look like a man trying to defend himself. He looked like someone finally realizing the weight of what he had done. "So, the house is really gone?" he asked. "Yes." "And the savings?" "Most of it." Daniel nodded slowly. Then he asked something I hadn't expected. "Are you happier here?" I thought about that question for a moment. Outside the window, a few residents were walking slowly through the garden. A nurse was helping an old woman water the flowers. And beside me stood Ethan. "I'm at peace," I said. Daniel swallowed. I never wanted you to hate me, he said quietly. I don't hate you, I replied. That surprised him. But I learned something important. I continued. What? I looked at both of them. Love isn't proven by words. My hand rested gently over Ethan's. It's proven by who shows up. The room fell silent again. And in that quiet moment, 3 generations of the same family understood something that no inheritance could ever buy: respect, presence, and the simple truth that the way we treat people always finds its way back to us. No one spoke. Ethan stayed beside me, and I could feel the quiet strength in his presence. Sometimes the youngest person in the room understands the most. Finally, Daniel stood up. I should go, he said, his voice lower than before. He looked at Ethan. You're coming with me? Ethan hesitated. I'll stay a little longer, he replied. Daniel nodded slowly. For once, he didn't argue. Before leaving, he turned back toward me. I didn't realize how this looked, he said. I studied his face. For the first time that day, he didn't look like a man thinking about money, houses, or papers. He looked like a son who had made a mistake he couldn't easily fix. Sometimes we don't see things clearly, I told him. Daniel gave a small, uneasy nod. Then he walked out of the room. The door closed softly behind him. For a moment, Ethan and I just sat there. Grandpa, he said after a while, are you really okay with everything you did? I smiled. More than okay. But that house, he said. Dad thought it would always be his. That's exactly why I changed things, I replied. Ethan frowned slightly. I leaned back in my chair and looked toward the garden again. You see that building over there? I asked. He nodded. They're planning to build another one just like it. For the donation? He asked. Yes. I paused for a moment. There are a lot of people here whose families never visit. Ethan's expression softened. So now they'll have better care, he said. That's the idea. He thought about that for a few seconds. Then he smiled. Grandma would have liked that. Hearing her mentioned made my chest tighten a little. Yes, I said quietly. She would have. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip lower, filling the room with warm golden light. Ethan helped me stand so we could walk slowly out to the garden. We moved carefully along the path between the flowers. After a few steps, Ethan asked something unexpected. Do you think Dad will ever understand? I looked up at the sky for a moment before answering. Maybe. And if he does? I smiled gently. Then it will be the best inheritance he could ever receive. Ethan tilted his head. What do you mean? I looked at him and said the one thing life had taught me after all these years. The chance to become a better man than he was yesterday. We kept walking through the garden in silence. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel abandoned. Because sometimes, family isn't the one who takes what you leave behind. It's the one who chooses to walk beside you while you're still here. Ethan and I kept walking slowly along the garden path. The air outside felt warmer than inside the building, and the smell of fresh soil and flowers reminded me of the backyard your grandmother and I used to take care of together. Grandpa, Ethan said after a while, do you think Dad will come back? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched an old man sitting on a bench nearby while a volunteer read him a newspaper. The man listened carefully, nodding every now and then. Some people here waited every day for family that never came. Others had simply stopped waiting. I think your father has a lot to think about, I finally said. Ethan kicked a small pebble on the path. He wasn't always like this, he murmured. I smiled faintly. No one starts that way. We reached a wooden bench near a small fountain and sat down. The water trickled quietly, and for a moment the whole world felt calm. Then Ethan looked at me again. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you tell him you heard what he said to the nurse? I chuckled softly. Oh, he knows. Ethan frowned. But you never said it directly. I leaned back against the bench. Sometimes people hear the truth louder when you don't shout it. Ethan thought about that. After a moment, he nodded slowly. You're wise, Grandpa. I'm old, I corrected with a smile. Not the same thing. We sat there watching the fountain for a few minutes. Then Ethan said something that surprised me. If you ever leave here, you could come live with us. I turned toward him. Your father might not like that idea. Ethan shrugged. Then he'll have to deal with it. I laughed quietly. You're braver than he was at your age. Someone has to be, Ethan replied. The sun was beginning to set, turning the sky shades of orange and pink. Just then, I saw a familiar car slowly pulling into the parking lot. Ethan noticed it too. That's Dad's car, he said. We both watched as Daniel stepped out. But this time, he didn't walk in with the same confident stride as before. He moved slower, almost cautiously. What do you think he wants? Ethan asked. I looked at my son approaching the building again. I think, I said softly, your father might finally be ready to listen. Ethan and I stayed on the bench as Daniel walked toward the garden path. When he reached us, he stopped a few feet away. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Daniel took a deep breath. Dad, he said. His voice was different now. Quieter. I think I owe you an apology. And sometimes in life, that's where the real story begins. Not with inheritance, not with money, but with the moment someone finally understands what truly matters.